Hey, thanks for checking this out. I wanted to give you some tips on how I edit my ScreenFlow documents. Some of these are speed oriented, some of them are style oriented, and the style oriented stuff is pretty important to me. So we're starting out with this document, and first of all, what I'm going to do is hit Command plus in order to make this a little bit bigger. I usually make it big enough to fit my screen. That way, when you make a cut, you can more easily tell if there's jumpiness between the end of the first cut and the beginning of the next one. I'll also zoom in the timeline here to either 1 or 2 second increments, and I'll try to stay consistent between different editing sessions so that I can get familiar with the waveforms down here. Sometimes those can give really important clues as to what's happening in the speaking process. Now, there's several different ways to cut, but the easiest way I've found is to press I where you want to begin, and the timeline will become purple for every spot that's going to be cut. And then drag to where you want to cut and hit O, and that marks the end point. And you can see the purple is just right here where the silence is. Whenever you cut, make sure there's a bit of space before you see the speaking start in the waveform. Not a lot, but at least a little, because we don't want it to clip right there, especially at the beginning of the document. So in order to delete this, you just hit Control Delete, and it deletes it and then removes that space. That's called a ripple delete. You can find it in the menu here somewhere. So almost all of the edits that you do will probably be with a ripple delete. Another method I've used in the past is simply cutting using the T character and then dragging to make sure that that space disappears. But if you do that, if there's been any cuts after this point, then they won't come along with it. So the ripple delete takes care of moving everything past the scrubber over to fill up that space. Okay, I'm just hitting undo, which is Command Z. So from here, I'm going to start to listen until something sounds weird. So you're about to hear my voice, but it's in the video rather than me actually narrating. Okay, I'm going to hit the space bar to start playback. So this is close to what we need, but we need this image to be a bit smaller. We also need this submitted by admin to disappear. And we need to set a custom title at the top. We don't want it to say airspeed velocity t-shirt in order to match the wireframes. I'm going to stop here for just a sec because I'm about to scroll over. I'm using a touchpad in order to work with this. I've used several different pointer devices. I've used a tablet, I've used a mouse, and the touchpad seems to be a little bit more smoother to work with. For example, I can easily scroll back and forth using the two-fingered swipe. So I'll scroll along as I go through in order to keep this playhead about in the middle. I'll do it when it gets to about 75% over. I'm going to move the playhead back a little bit just to make sure I didn't miss something, and I'm going to press spacebar to start again. In order to match the wireframes, I'm going to jump over to it. We needed to say about this product. Okay, I hit spacebar again because I know that there's a gap in speaking here. Now, that last phrase ended pretty confidently. It sounded right. So I'm going to make a guess that the space is probably me thinking or figuring something out instead of me having to rephrase something. So I'm going to hit I to begin the cut here. Now notice there's a little bit of space here, and that's good. You can see that that's about in line with the other spaces between phrases. We want to make sure that that space isn't too small or too big, but we're also going to listen to it afterwards to make sure that it sounds natural. So I'm scrolling over, and then I'm going to the point where the waveform starts again, and I'm hitting O, and then I'm going to hit Command Delete in order to ripple delete that. Now I'm going to hit Shift and the back arrow key either once or twice depending on where the waveform is, and I'm going to play back from here just to make sure that the transition into this next bit is smooth. I'm going to go ahead and hit the spacebar to play. I needed to say about this product. So Display Suite actually gives us, so that was pretty good. You know, it's a little bit of a longer pause, but that's okay. There needs to be some long pauses to give the listeners time to catch up with what's going on. I'm going to hit spacebar again. Enough control to be able to do that. And so if we jump back, okay, so this waveform ends with something that's not very confident. It sounds like I started to say something and then rethought it. So what we don't know is where I'm going to pick up, at what point I start to re-say what I'm saying. Chances are it's right here. And so if we jump back, but I don't know for sure. So what I'm going to do is skip ahead and listen to the subsequent waveforms here to see where I ended. So if we jump back to the browser, Okay. Okay, so that was one take. I'm thinking that it's possible that I re-say that here. And we go back to the, nope, I don't. Actually, I continue from this point. So it goes, so if we jump back to the browser and then over to, and we go back to the, and we go back to, so actually it skips to right here. And we go back to edit this. Okay, so I'm gonna go back here and remind myself where the cut happens. And so if we jump back, okay, so that actually gets replaced by this. So if we jump back to the browser, and then this part gets skipped. And we go back to the, and then it goes to here. And we go back to, now that seems a little complicated, but as you start to play with it, you'll get a sense of my speech patterns. And because you'll be doing it faster, you'll remember exactly which each of these waveforms were. So we're gonna cut right here because this is the beginning of a misspoken phrase. So I'm gonna hit I. And we're going to continue from the beginning of this phrase, which was actually solid, and I'll hit O and use Command Delete in order to ripple delete. I'm going to hit Shift back in order to listen to this transition real quick, be able to do that. So if we jump back to the browser, okay, I hit spacebar right here because I know that we're going to cut right here, and I'm going to hit I. And remember, this bit right here isn't any good. And we go back to the, so I'm going to get the playhead right in the right position here. And I can do that by using the space bar and the arrow keys. I'll actually use the arrow keys a lot to do small movements. You can see the playhead moving back and forth to just make sure that the placement is right. And then I'm gonna hit O, and then Command Delete again. And I'm gonna hit Shift back in order to listen to this transition. Back to the browser, and we go back to edit. Okay, that transition sounded pretty good. Sometimes if we're doing multiple ones, we might want to listen to the whole thing and scroll back a ways and press spacebar to listen from there. Be able to do that. So if we jump back to the browser and we go back to edit this view mode, I'm going to go up to Structure, Content Types. Okay, right there I think there was a little bit of a pause that could be removed. It was not quite necessarily, it didn't quite need to be that long. So my strategy in creating these tutorials is I'm thinking about what happens if 1,000 or several thousand people watch it, which they probably will. We want to make sure that every second that's not necessary is taken out, because that second becomes a waste of time 1,000 times over, and that's actually a lot of wasted time. So we can save that time by just cutting out these little bits here where the pauses are a little too long. And also it starts to sound a little bit more natural and eloquent. So you've probably gotten a sense about how long that spacing is. You can scroll back to kind of see there's some spaces here and here to kind of get a sense of how long this space should actually be. So I'm gonna hit I here and O here, and I'll ripple delete it. And then we'll listen to the transition. Do Structure, Content Types, Product, Manage Display, and then click. Now there was a pause there, but something was happening on the screen. So that pause was actually okay. And then click. It's a pacing issue. If nothing was happening in the video during that space, then it would feel a little bit like a long pause. But since something is happening, there's those little events to keep the attention going and to let the viewer know that we're still working through a process. Okay, so I'm gonna move the playhead back here because I just don't want to miss anything, and I'm gonna hit spacebar, display, and then click sidebar. At the bottom here, we have a setting. Scrolling over. At the bottom here, we have a setting. Oh, okay. So there was a misspoken phrase there. You can tell when something gets repeated, it should probably trigger something in your brain. And you can tell by the shape of the waveform here that I'm actually saying the same thing. You see the two little bumps and then the big bump. Right here, you see two little bumps and then a big bump. Sometimes I'll say things many times over, just trying to find the right way to phrase something. And so this is a good way to sort of skip ahead. If you see 6 of these in a row, you don't need to listen to every one. You can just skip to the last one, make sure that that's solid, and then continue. Okay, so this is the missed phrase here. I'm gonna go back a little ways. I'm kind of curious, I just wanna make sure that this space here was okay. And so I'm going back a little ways and hitting spacebar, display, and then click sidebar. At the bottom here, we have a setting. At the bottom, okay, so let's go ahead and cut here. Usually it's good to cut at the end of the pause. If the pause sounded natural, then that gives us an easy way to cut from one to the other. So I'm gonna cut to the beginning of where things are being said right here. I'm gonna hit O, and then again, Command Delete to ripple delete. I'm gonna hit shift back a couple of times and then hit play, spacebar, and click sidebar. At the bottom here, we have a setting that says layout for product and sidebar. I wanna listen to that again. It sounded a little bit awkward. And then click sidebar. At the bottom here, we have a setting that says, okay, that pause was a little bit long, but it's okay. I'm gonna leave it as is. It says layout for product and sidebar, and we can select the layout. And then if we click here, we have, okay. So the reason why I stopped there was because my little icon here popped up and I didn't want to show that in the tutorial. Okay, so we resume. I'm gonna listen to what this next waveform says. We have a set of, and if we click here, we have a set of options. Okay, there was actually a double, that was said really fast without a pause between it, but it was a repetition. We have a set of, and if we click here, we have a set of options. Okay, I wanna see if I say that differently over here. Now something more happens here. Okay, I need to listen to this a little bit more to know whether I actually skipped this part back here or if that was solid. So I'm gonna listen a little bit. Then, now once Display Suite takes over the layout of this page, okay, I think I actually do wanna mention that about the options. So it starts right here, I think. I'm gonna hit space. And if we click here, we have a set of options. Okay, that's the solid phrase. Over here, it's misspoken, I think. Let me just listen to it again. And then if we click here, we have, okay, and I'm gonna listen one more time. And if we click here, we have a set of options. Okay, so that's what I want. So I'm gonna scroll over here to the end of this pause. I'm gonna hit I, and then I'm going over here. And right here in between phrases like this can be a sensitive place to cut. You can see that there's a little bit of activity in the waveform to either side of the playhead. And so you wanna hit back and forward until you get something that is silent, or at least as close to silent as can possibly be. So I'm going back and forth real quick. I'm gonna be quiet. You can hear there's little sounds everywhere, but it's not too bad. So the thing is that if there's a sound right there, then when it cuts to the sound from silence, it will make a popping noise that is a little distracting. This should probably be okay, but we'll listen to it. I'm gonna hit O in order to mark this area, and then ripple delete with Command Delete, and then I'm gonna go back and listen to this. Sidebar, and we can select the layout. And if we click here, we have a set of options. Okay, not bad. But what happens at this point is that I check my email because I got that new message. And so I need to actually cut out the part where I go there, options. So I'm trying to find the very last point that I can cut. After the sound, I'm hitting back and forth before I go over to my email client. So right here, I have just enough space after the thing is spoken. I'm still gonna show hovering over this icon, but that's okay. That's something that I can mess with later. And I'll hit I in order to start the cut there. And then I'm gonna listen over here. Now something more happens here than, now once Display Suite, okay. Now I said this 3 times, and so I wanna scroll over and make sure I don't say it again. So you can see from here, the waveform looks pretty confident. There's no long pauses or anything. So I'm gonna make a guess that right about here is where we start talking confidently again. And I'll hit O and then ripple delete. And I'm gonna scroll back over and watch and listen to this transition out. And if we click here, we have a set of options. Now once Display Suite takes over the set of options. So that pause is not quite long enough. You can tell it's a little awkward. Set of options. Now once Display Suite, also there's that little visual break. Now once, as we have something overlaying, and then the cursor moves from up here, right here to over here. So something I'm gonna do is modify the visuals a little bit because the cursor's actually, because a cursor actually shouldn't be doing anything right here. So I'm gonna drag this section right here over to the last point where the cursor's being pretty innocuous. It's not really doing anything. And then I'm gonna drag this edge over to extend it over and see how that looks. Here we have a set of options. Now, okay, that looks pretty good. Actually, I'm gonna watch it one more time. And if we click here, we have a set of options. Now, once Display Suite takes over the, okay, so now that there's not the visual hiccup, it runs together a little bit more smoothly. Now, sometimes you're still going to have a visual hiccup, and when that happens, you want to overlay the two sides a little bit of the visuals like this. When you do this, it creates a really short transition that will fade between one location and the other. So if we press spacebar to watch it, here we have a set of, you see how it kind of fades out between the two? And when we watch this in context, I'm going to hit spacebar again, the layout. And if we click here, we have a set of options. It's quite a bit smoother. So whenever you see a visual hiccup where the cursor jumps from one place to another because of a cut that you've made, and only really because of a cut you made, because any other hiccups are actually part of the visual experience, then you want to add that little transition there to make it seem intentional. Otherwise, the viewer is going to wonder in the back of their head if maybe something was accidentally deleted from the tutorial, if they're missing something. Since we've been talking for a while, and this would also happen if you were distracted with something else, I'm going to go back and listen back a little ways to listen through these transitions and then keep going. I'll hit the spacebar, product, and sidebar, and we can select the layout. And if we click here, we have a set of options. Now, once Display Suite takes over the layout of this page, and it will look identical. Now, once Display Suite takes over, okay, so that was misspoken. Over the now, once display, and it starts right here, and we repeat it now right. We repeat it right here, and then start to say it probably the right way here. You can tell that there's more being spoken after that. I'm gonna leave just a little bit of space there. Ripple delete, and let's listen to this again. And if we click here, we have a set of options. Now, once Display Suite takes over the layout of this page, we have many more options. Now, once Display Suite takes over the layout of this, I watched that again. I skipped back again because I wanted to see the visual transition between these two sections right here, and I didn't notice it the first time around. Okay, I'm gonna hit spacebar to continue. This page, we have many more options available to us in terms of what fields we show and display. For example, we can't choose to hide the title up here. It's not even an option in the field list. So there was some waveform that we didn't see there on the side, and that happens when you're playing back and you're scrolling at the same time. So you have to hit spacebar in order to stop the playback, and then hit spacebar again once the waveform loads. Okay, I'm gonna go back a little ways with shift back arrow key and hit the spacebar again. Not even an option in the field listing or the submitted by information. But once we've, so I knew that this was coming up because I saw in the waveform that there was this long gap. Chances are it was something misspoken. So we'll listen to this again. This is where we resume from, but both will become fields that we can toggle on and off simply by choosing information. But both will become fields that we can toggle on and off listing or the submitted by information. Okay, setting the endpoint here. But once I just listened to it again to make sure that I had the right spot. But both will become fields. Okay, so you see what I did was I actually clicked back and then hit space when I wanted to stop. O, ripple delete. Let's listen to the transition. Information. But both will become fields that we, okay, there was a visual hiccup there. Information. You see it? But both, okay, so in that case, we want to do a little bit of a transition here. It doesn't matter where we're dragging from, back or forward, forward, back. We just want to make sure that we're not actually dragging the actual clip and we're actually dragging the edge of it. So I'm going to hit undo so you can see. If we're dragging the actual clip, we're dragging like this and we're pulling it over. We still get a transition, right? But if we scroll over to take a look, we've now created a gap here, and this sound and this visual will now be out of sync. So we're going to undo that by clicking undo. That moves it back, and we're going to scroll back over. And notice that when we get to the edge here, we need to first highlight the clip we want to stretch. It will have this yellow border around it, and then we get this sort of arrow back and forth bit, and then we can drag it over safely. So if we scroll back over, we see there's not this gap here. We're just extending it out a little bit. So now let's look at that transition information. But both will become fields. Okay. That's a little more intentional. It looks like we meant to make that transition. Okay, let's listen and continue. So we can toggle on and off simply by choosing a layout. Okay, so there's a hiccup. Toggle on and off simply by choosing a layout. Now there's some additional spaces to the right here. I want to make sure that I just don't re-say that bit again. If we don't want to use any special layout, we can just select one column. Okay, simply by choosing a layout. If we don't want, all right, on and off, simply by on and off. So here's our in point, here's our out point. I'm ripple deleting, hitting
on and
spacebar,
off.
simply by choosing a layout. Okay, on and off, simply by choosing a, so we have a little bit of a visual hiccup, but simply by choosing a, it's not too bad because we're actually dragging around with the cursor anyway, but we can still do a little overlap here in order to make it smoother. I'm gonna hit spacebar, layout. If we don't want to use any special, okay, and then scroll down and click. Okay, so I was just making sure that I wasn't repeating this phrase right here, over here, using a layout. Okay, I'm gonna do the in point right here, and then the out point right here. We're keeping the pause about what it is to keep it natural. I'm gonna ripple delete and go back using a layout. If we don't want to use any special layout, we can just select one column. Sometimes when I get in the groove, I'm just gonna pause right after where I know there's gonna be a cut and I hit I to start the in point because I know it's gonna be there anyway. And then we'll listen to these next bits and then scroll down, select one column, and then scroll down and click save. Once we did that, you see okay, so all these phrases are actually right. So we're gonna cut this out, make sure there's a little bit of a pause beforehand, and delete that, ripple delete it, and then let's listen to that cut. Select one column, and then scroll down and click save. Okay, so right here, we click save, and in a browser, when you click something to submit a form or refresh a page, it takes a second. So it's okay to leave a pause around that, just not too long. Maybe 2 seconds, save. So that's absolutely as long as we'd want to go right there. So I'm going to drag it back a little bit to keep it a little bit shorter, hit I, and then let's see if this phrase is actually the right one. I'm going to hit spacebar. Once we did that, you see we have, after we submit that, okay, you see how I kind of used the mouse cursor to play just the beginning part of those different phrases? They look kind of similar in waveform shape, so I just wanted to really quickly see where we start speaking for real. And it's right here. So there's two misspoken phrases, and then we begin right here. So I'm gonna hit O and delete, and let's make sure this pause works out okay. I'm gonna scroll back a full second or two, and then scroll down and click save. After we submit that, you see we have image and body up here like we did. Okay, something about that sounded just a little bit awkward, so I want to listen to it again. Down and click save. After we submit that, you see we have, okay, I think that pause is still a little bit too long, so I'm going to decrease it a little bit. I'm going to hit I and O and delete just this area right here. Let's listen to it again and click save. After we submit that, you see, okay, part of what's sounding weird is that my voice sort of comes in out of nowhere. After we submit that, you see, but that could just be because I'm using a hard sort of right there. I'm gonna leave that as is for now. After we submit that, you see we have image and body up here like we did before, but then we have a number of disabled columns. Okay. We know that's a misspoken phrase there. Let's just try to make sure that original space between the two phrases is about right once we cut it. We just want to keep a natural spacing, and sometimes it's hard to judge that just by looking, but this right here was the natural pause. That's how I would have spoken it if I was just going for it. So we can try to match up that length. Okay, I'm gonna ripple delete, hit shift back a couple times, and body up here like we did before. But then we have a number of disabled fields as well. Now I say fields, but they're really fields in the sense that they group together information. They're not fields in the sense that we can add and remove them using the Manage Fields section up here. See our missing waveform here? If I hit spacebar, there it comes. So we now have submitted by disabled, and we have titled disabled as well. Okay, so there's this long pause here we need to remove, but it's not because of misspoken. It's not because of misspoken phrases. Let's try to keep a bit of a natural pause between it. In, out, ripple, delete, up here. So we now have submitted by, visually it looked like, always keep aware of listening and also looking at the visuals for a transition right here. So we looks pretty smooth. We now have submitted by disabled, and we have titled disabled as well. Okay, I'm gonna stop and hit I. And let's see where this takes us. There's a bunch of space here. I'm just gonna hit O to delete all of the space to bring our two phrases a little closer to each other. I don't know if this is what actually should be spoken next or not, but I just wanna kind of remove that space. Let's listen to how that works. Disabled as well. So at this point, okay, so there's a visual hiccup there, disabled as well. So at this point, if we looked at this if we close, so the reason we didn't fix that visual hiccup is because we don't know if this is where right here is where we actually want to start. And you can tell we do a couple of rephrasings here. Let's listen to see if this is the solid one. So at this point, if we close this out and looked at our product in the review page, you'd see we now have, okay. So from here to here looks good. So I'm gonna hit out. Since I'm right here, I'm gonna hit I here. This is what we wanna cut out. I'm gonna ripple delete, and then let's play that back. So at this point, now there was a hiccup there, so I want to create a transition. Make sure that you get this little arrow bit before you make the transition. And let's watch that again. I'm gonna hit spacebar as well. So at this point, if we close this out, so a little bit smoother there, and looked at our product in the review page, you'd see we now have page. This is a misspoken phrase. Let's make sure that this is the right one. You'd see the title and the submitted by disappearing. We have product reference. We have the product reference listed by disappearing. We have product by disappearing. Okay, out here. Let's watch the transition. We have product reference view page. We have a little bit of a visual hiccup there. I'm gonna add a transition. Now, a lot of times I'll add this transition as I'm listening, so it's not something you have to stop and do. You can actually, because you know that the transition is the best thing that you can do at that point, because we're not gonna do any other major editing, you can just do it without going back and reviewing it. But sometimes it's nice to see it in action and know that it's working out properly. Okay, let's watch that. In the review page, we have product reference. We have the product reference label here, but okay, so I made the transition a little prematurely because we have a misspoken phrase here. So I'm gonna hit I, and then we have the product reference label here, but we can turn that off. And then we have the content. So now all that's left is to add, okay, product reference. We have the product reference. Okay, I'm gonna hit out here. Now that removed our transition page. We have so now we might wanna add another transition there. Again, you don't have to really preview those once you're confident that you're doing it right, but we'll go ahead and take a look at this page. We have the product reference label here, but we can turn that off. And then we have the content. Okay, hitting it in. Let's listen to this. So now all that's left is to add a custom title at the top, which we can do with a custom field in Display Suite. So now my instinct here was actually just to cut this before listening to it, to cut this space here, because this waveform here, it looks like a good phrase. It kind of builds up, you see it sort of starts small, gets a little bit bigger, and then here at the end it sort of tapers off, and there's no sort of awkward spaces or anything. So that looks like a proper phrase. So just from doing this a while, I would have just deleted this silence and listened to that and moved on to the next phrase. So I'm gonna delete that silence, listen to this transition. Every transition should be listened to. Content. So now all that's left is to add a custom title at the top, which we can do with a custom field in Display Suite. I don't know if you noticed, but at the end of here, there's a breath, Display Suite. I kind of breathe in. Those breaths are actually pretty natural when you listen to somebody speak. So when we cut, we want to make sure to cut at the end of a breath to make sure that that's actually part of the pause. So let's listen again and stop at the end of the breath. Display Suite. Right there is where it ends. So what happens is someone breathes in, there's a slight pause, and then they start speaking. In this case, there's actually a long pause. And then this looks like a pretty good phrase. There might be something wonky going on over here, but I'm gonna hit O and just delete this here without listening ahead yet. Field in display suite. I'm gonna hit back a couple of times in the browser. That sounded a little bit awkward. Let me listen again. The custom field in display suite. I'm gonna hit back a couple of times in the browser. I think that's okay. I just needed to listen to it again to make sure that it made sense. In order to get back to the manage display section of the sidebar view mode for the product. Okay, view mode. There's a breath there. View mode, and for the product needs to go right on the other side of that breath. View mode for the product. Okay, I'm gonna hit I right here. It looks like we have a bit of silence going on. So let's first remove this product reference. Wait. For the product, okay, something weird is going on here. I feel like we just jumped. So one thing about these tutorials is that they go step by step. So if you see any steps that are missing, like from here we go to this screen over to a totally different screen, why did that happen? Let's make sure that we understand there. View mode for the product. Okay. Browser in order to get back to the, I'm gonna listen back and see if maybe we're actually skipping some of this content. I'm gonna hit back a couple of times in the browser in order to get back to the with a custom field in display suite. I'm gonna hit this to add a custom title at the top. So now all that's left is to add a custom title at the top, which we can do with a custom field in display suite. Okay. Custom title, custom field, and display suite. And then what are we talking about here? So let's first remove this product reference label, which we can do by changing the display of the review. Okay, so this may be a little hard if you're not actually, if you haven't used Drupal before, but what I did right here, and it's okay if you don't catch all of this, I'll catch them later. What I did right here is I decided to go a different route. So first of all, I wanted to add a title here to the top. I was gonna add some text, but then I decided, no, it makes more sense to try to remove this little text right here that already exists first. So this transition might be a little bit awkward because you might not be actually following along with the content of the video, which is totally fine. In cases like this where it's ambiguous and you're not quite sure what to do, just leave anything that you think might need to be in there. I'm gonna listen through this entire cut that you create and make sure that there isn't anything that shouldn't be in there and make edits myself. So this might be one of those situations, but because I know what's going on here, I'm going to try to make the transition work. Field in display suite. I'm gonna hit this to add a custom title at the, okay. We have the product reference label here, but we can turn that off. And then we have the content. So now all that's left is to add our product in the review page. We have the product reference label here, but we can turn that off. So now all that's left is to add a custom title at the top, which we can do with a custom field in display suite. Okay, I think that's where we need to end and start this next bit. So let's first remove this product reference label. Okay, yep, that's where we need to go. I'm gonna hit O and ripple delete. Now that was a huge section, so it's possible that I might not get the timing right here in display suite. So let's first remove this product. You might have noticed a visual hiccup there. So I'm gonna create a little transition. Display suite. So let's first remove this product reference label, which we can do by changing the display of the review. Okay, I'm gonna hit I. So here in Manage Display, under ripple delete. The review. So here in Manage Display, under Product Reference, we want to set the label to be hidden. And then click Save. Okay, there was a long sort of section here without speaking, but that's okay because we were doing something. And then click Save. And if we scroll down, you'll see now we just have the title and the content. Oh, what? Okay. And there's actually one more way there's actually one quicker way to get to the display settings for this particular node, and that's by hovering over the node. Okay, so here I discover something that I totally spaced out on in previous sections of this video series, which is that there's this cogwheel here. So I'm kind of discovering it and then trying to, play it off as like, hey, here's just something else we can do. So I'm gonna hit O here just to mark it, but I'm not going to delete this yet. I wanna make sure that I have the right. If we scroll down, you'll see now we just have the title and the content. Okay. I think we're good deleting this bit. So I'm ripple deleting, going back, and the content. And there's actually one quicker way to get to the display settings for this particular node. And that's by hovering over the node and clicking on the cogwheel and clicking Manage Display. Okay, marking the in point. So in order to create a custom title for this, okay, that was a misspoken phrase, just deleting that and all that silence. Let's make sure that clicking Manage Display. So in order to create a custom, it was subtle, but there was a visual hiccup between where the cursor was. So in order to create a custom title for this view mode, what we need to do is click on Custom Fields down here. And again, this is a display suite feature. And we're gonna click Add a Code Field. The label here is going to be About This Product. Okay, is going to be About This Product. Now when I'm typing short bits, that's just a few words like a title or an email address, it's okay to skip most of the space there without doing anything. However, if we're filling out an entire form and I mention that I'm gonna fast forward through it, that means that we need to change the speed of that so that we actually see all of the steps involved, but they're faster. So right here, we can cut this out, but I'm gonna just make it faster so you know how to do that. The way we need to do that, oops, you see I accidentally drug this over a little bit and I just hit undo to drag it back. So what we actually have to do is create cuts, not just doing in and out points, but we need to create cuts in both the audio and the video, and I'll show you why in a sec. So you can select them both by hitting Shift and clicking it. So we have both of these outlined in yellow now, and then you type T and you see it cut right here. So now we need to do that again at the end of where that occurs. So I'm highlighting both of these cuts and hitting T to cut them right here. So the text is silent, so we could just remove this and that would be fine, but it's important to actually fill this space with something visually for me when I do editing, because when I see a gap in that where there's nothing here, it means that there's something else I need to do. That it triggers a couple of actions for me. Either I need to add a title or I need to add an animation. So we actually need to keep something here. So let's go ahead and fast forward this first. I'm gonna double click it, and then you can select the speed, and you see as we're dragging it over, the clip is actually getting smaller. So somewhere between 200 and 300 is good, but it just depends on the space that you need to fill. If we're filling out a long form and it takes 30 seconds to fill it out, then we might want to cut it down to something like 5 seconds, which is 600 times faster. It's all about pacing. So, okay, we've got that squared away. So now let's drag the audio to match the size. Now both of these are selected, so if we change the size of this, it's gonna change the size of both of them. So I'm gonna hit undo here. I'm gonna click on the gray area in order to deselect everything, and then select the audio and drag it over, and it will snap to the size here. Now we have this gap, and we can remove that using in and out again. So I'm hitting I at the beginning of the gap, O on the end, and then ripple deleting that out. Okay, let's watch that. About this product, and that's okay, so that went pretty smooth. Actually going to be the content of the field as well. Okay, let's see, scratch that. We're gonna scratch that. Okay, so sometimes I give some audio cues that we need to backtrack a little bit. We're gonna have this apply to node. Now, okay, so this is where we're coming back in, but what we're not doing is copying the text over to this area. And that's actually going to be the content of the field as well. Okay, so that's what we can cut out. So I'm hitting I here and deleting there. Product. We're gonna have this apply to node. Now, note that this field, even though it's specific to a product, is now going to be available to any other view modes for any entities that use Display Suite in order to lay out the fields. Okay? If you need to limit which, I'm just going back a little bit to make sure that the pause is going to be natural. Oh, ripple delete the fields. If you need to limit which the fields. If you need to limit, the cursor jumped a little bit there, which entities can use this, then you'll have to use if you need to limit what entities, there's no way within Display Suite to limit. If you need to limit what entities use this, there's no way within Display Suite to limit which entities. There's no way in Display Suite to limit which node types this applies to. I'm going to. Okay. If you need to limit which entities can use. If you need to limit which entities can use this, then you'll have to use Okay, so I'm actually changing my mind about what I'm saying here. If you need to limit which entities can use this, then you'll have to use so I go from if you need to there's no way in Display Suite to limit which node types this applies to backtracking. So this again might require a little bit of context in Drupal to understand. Again, just take the best cuts out of, if you're not sure which phrase is the accurate one, or if one phrase is replacing another phrase, then just leave them both and I'll edit it out later, I'll notice. Okay, so we wanted to keep this here. I'm gonna delete, let's make sure the transition's good. Lay out the fields. There's no way in Display Suite to limit which. Okay, here's a little weird artifact of ScreenFlow. We have a little cut here, but let's make sure, okay. I just wanted to make sure that a cut did happen there and we didn't accidentally delete something or drag something over the fields. There's no way in Display Suite to limit which node types this applies to. I'm gonna scroll down. Okay. That's so not true. Ah, I have discovered that I've spoken poorly. Bundle. No. I'm thinking to myself. More thinking. So now if we leave this, so we're gonna backtrack in the content a little bit. So if we leave this just as is, this about this product field is gonna be a, okay. So this is where we wanted to backtrack to. I'm gonna ripple delete. You might have wanted to make sure that the beginning of that ripple delete was right. I'm gonna go back a little ways here. Which node types this applies to. I'm gonna scroll down. So if we leave this just as is, this about this, okay, so there was a visual, a major visual skip there. So we're gonna add a transition. Product field is gonna be available to us for, and actually you might see this text up here, which all of a sudden appeared. I noticed this later on in my recording and actually skipped this part altogether, but we'll go ahead and edit it as if you don't know that. Any node types, but we can limit that by using the limit field here. Now, as the instructions say here, field here. There's the end of the natural pause. Okay. There was, I could tell that there was gonna be a little bit of a skip there. Field here. Now, as the instructions say here, we're gonna add values in the form of bundle and then view mode. So bundle is the name of the node type, in this case product. View mode is the name of the view mode, which in this case is sidebar. Spacebar to load the waveform in. So we'll go ahead and enter product, and then there was an there. There should never be us. Let's remove this space out. Ripple delete sidebar. So we'll go ahead and enter product. Okay, here, you know, because it's now we'll enter product. And since we typed that pretty fast, we'll go ahead and leave it in. And then a pipe. And then sidebar. Okay, and then a pipe. And then a pipe, and then sidebar. I'm gonna hit I, just in case we don't cover anything in this space. Okay, then we'll scroll down. And that's where I noticed the problem. Okay, but let's hit O. You see how there's this transition for the circle, how it kind of goes in and out? Don't worry about capturing that transition. You can cut that out without a problem. Okay, I'm gonna ripple delete and listen here. Sidebar. Okay, then we'll scroll down. All right, now we have a long bit of silence. And then we'll scroll down and put in heading 2 tags about this product. Okay, so that looks right. Just ripple delete. I hit O and then scroll down, delete. And then we'll scroll down. Okay, so we actually copy this. And okay, then we'll scroll down. Okay. So I'm actually going to cut out this okay part. I say okay all the time, so it's no problem to cut them out. And this allows us to cut before we start seeing that red border, which is what I wanted to try to avoid. Go down. So O, ripple delete, sidebar. And then we'll scroll down and put in heading 2 tags about this product. Okay, I'm just gonna hit I here at the end. Even though I'm not done typing, it's okay. In this case, we don't need to use display suite code. We can simply use, full HTML. Okay, so I just wanted to get a sense of the lay of the land. We'll cut this product. In this case, we don't need to use display suite code. And then I know from here, we were gonna go straight over to this. I'm gonna hit display suite code. We can use full HTML. A little bit of a hiccup there. I'm gonna scroll down HTML. I'm gonna scroll down. A little bit of a pause there we could remove. Not the whole thing though. HTML. I'm gonna scroll down and click save. Okay, after we click save, there's always gonna be a little bit more of a space. And if we scroll down, we'll save. And if we scroll down, a little bit of a hiccup. Again, you can add the transition either direction. And we'll see that we still haven't added the field. The field exists, but it hasn't been, actually, I wasn't sure what was just said there, so I'm gonna repeat that. And if we scroll down, we'll see that we still haven't added the field. The field exists, but it hasn't been enabled for the content type yet. So we're gonna click the cogwheel and manage display. And then we're gonna drag about this product up above the image and scroll down and click save. And when we scroll down to the bottom, now we have the title about this product, the image, and the content. So now the only thing left to do is to change the size of this image, which we can do with an, okay, so there were various little pauses in the content. So now the only thing left, but they're natural, they're actually between different kind of topics or parts that we're tackling. So we'll leave all those. To do is to change the size of this image, which we can do with an image style. Okay, I just know from history that that is probably something I don't need, so I'm gonna hit I. But there's something to think about here, which is that, so now there are several image styles we can choose from to display. But there's something to think about here, which is that, of course, that doesn't make any sense going into, so now there are several image styles we can choose. So I was just rephrasing, starting from a different point altogether. So let's ripple delete that, hit back, which we can do with an image style. So now there are several image styles. That space could be a little longer, but we'll leave it. So we can choose from to display this. Actually, let's take a look at them now. If we click on the cogwheel on this node and click Manage Display, and then we look at the image and okay, we don't need that pause. Display. In, out, image display, delete. And then we look at the image and we click the cogwheel here, we'll see that we have several image styles available to us: thumbnail, medium, and large. Now we could use one of these, but doing so, one of these, we only need one but there. Use one of these, but doing so, a little bit of a visual hiccup, will cause us to run into, but doing so, okay, misspoken phrase. Use one of these, but doing so will, and we have to add that transition back again, will cause us to run into potential problems, but doing so will cause us to, we have to do it one more time. So actually, it does make sense to add a transition going towards the right, so from the previous clip to the next clip, because if you do need to recut it, it will remove the transition. Whereas if you go the other direction, I just hit undo, we go like this, and then we cut, we hit in and then out because we're gonna come in over here and delete. Then we have this weird little wonky transition place. But doing so, that doesn't really make sense visually. We don't, from an editing perspective, we don't know what's going on there. So I'm gonna undo those things that I just did. I think let's make sure that I remember that we were gonna cut right one of these. But doing so will cause us to run into potential problems. Okay, so this is the out. But doing so will cause us to run into potential problems later on. Add a transition on. So this is the same problems that would occur if we used, okay, on. And there's a breath here, so I'm going to the end of the breath. Later on. The same problems that would occur if we used a view mode in multiple contexts at the same time. So one final thing I wanted to point out was that when there's places where things are ambiguous and you're not quite sure exactly if you made the right choice, always err on leaving stuff in, because I'll edit those out later on. Also, feel free to mark them with a marker. You can use the tilde key, and then you can enter it. I'm not sure you were wanting to say here. Okay, and then I can right click this to see the markers and jump to them and know that these are things that I need to kind of be particularly aware of. Okay, so here are the big things for me. One, to remove silence. So this is any places where I'm speaking and I stop for a while, but also remove unnatural space between words. So these can be when I just sound a little awkward, or when I'm pausing within the context of a single phrase. Also, you're gonna hear me repeat things a lot because I'm looking for the right way to say it. I'm looking for the right tonation, or I'm looking for the right words, usually the right words. So you can skip to the last one. The last one is the one that worked out the best. I don't try a few and then pick which one I like the best. I'm always just trying, and then as soon as I get it right, it sounds right to me, then I'll continue. So if you see in the waveform where there's multiple phrases that look exactly the same, that's probably because I'm saying the same thing over and over again. You can just listen to the beginning parts to make sure, and then you can just keep the last one. Whenever you make a cut and there's a bit of a jump visually, the cursor jumps from one place to another, or the screen changes because we scrolled to a different part of the page, then add a little transition, going from the left clip to the right clip. It should be pretty short, but visually you should be able to see the fade between the two. And then wherever you have questions, just add a marker if you're not sure what I'm trying to say, or maybe you notice that I actually say things wrong, then make a note of it because I'll re-record those bits. All right, thank you so much for your help with this. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to let me know. Of course, you'll probably run into things that I didn't cover here, but I think I covered most of it and gave a sense of the workflow that seems to be the quickest to edit this type of work. Okay, thanks again.